Paul, I don't know if you saw on the Gray Zone News, and their the new investigation on their website. It shows that the Israeli-linked AI drones now monitor U.S. cities, and it seems that they're trying to control what's going on with the protests against Israel or something beyond that. They have something, but they're trying to monitor what's going on in the United States. What is of interest of this sort of movement, drones being used to control, to monitor what's going on in the United States?
Well, I don't know why the United States allows foreign drones in our airspace. That's the question. That's the question that should be
Actually, the
asked.
drones were made by U.S. company Skydio, but they were delivered to Israelis, and they're using by AI. They're using these drones to monitor what's going on. They're produced in the United States by you and used by Israel. This is
Yeah,
the
well, it doesn't really matter who produces them. If Israel is using drones in their possession in our airspace, I didn't realize the drones had that range to operate from Israel, but I'm not very knowledgeable about them.
these are AI. These are AI drones. They're controlled by AI, and
So,
they
well, that's something Trump should stop, whatever the purpose. Now, of course, Israel owes everything to its control over the United States. This is why it's so insistent on shutting down all criticism as anti-Semitic, as Holocaust denial, as hating Jews. They don't want any criticism of anything Israel does because the whole policy depends on American protection, American money, American military protection, diplomatic protection, and they don't want to lose that. So they're probably quite paranoid about keeping control. And I'm sure they'll do everything they can to keep control. ADL, APAC, these are powerful lobbies. They're not even forced to register as foreign lobbies. So we are so much under the thumb of Israel that I sometimes wonder if we have any sovereignty. I've made the point so many times that we've now had the first quarter of the 21st century, and our foreign policy has mainly been to clear out Israel's enemies in the Middle East. And we make up all kinds of lies and excuses to hide that. It's called a war on terror. So how are we sovereign when the main purpose of our foreign policy is to advance Greater Israel? And of course, when Netanyahu held up the map of Greater Israel, and then they announced that it now includes half of Saudi Arabia, and then they announced it includes Pakistan. President Trump, the Congress, the American foreign policy people, they didn't say, "What the hell are you talking about? Well, we're not. This is an absurdity. What do you mean?" They just accepted, didn't say a word. So they've got a lot of control, and they want to hold on to it, and they'll do whatever they think that takes.
Here is, Paul, what Tom Brock, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, said about how the countries around Israel who have common borders with Israel should behave.
recommendation is those countries whose boundary and border with Israel need to come to a border resolution. Israel's been very clear after October 7th, anything that threatens that border, they're not going to pay attention to the blue line, the green line, or the red line. They want normalization, they want a treaty and boundary agreement, and they will enforce it in their own right. The advice is, if you're on the boundary or border of Israel, and you're one of those countries, the first step, rather than thinking that you're going to fight them at the moment, is to align with them.
Yeah. The question today, I talked with Colonel Jacques, the question is, Israel doesn't seem to like to define its borders. How can somebody know where is that border?
It's Greater Israel. Their borders now include Pakistan. Look, they're in Syria. The Israeli forces, or at least the last I heard, they occupy southern Syria, right up to the borders right up to the city limits of Damascus. So their borders are expanding. Palestine is disappearing. Jordan is a de facto Israeli puppet state. I don't know if Israeli forces are still in southern Lebanon. I do know that the Israeli assassinations of Hezbollah leadership were so extensive that there may be Israeli forces now occupying some parts of southern Lebanon. I don't know. You see nothing about any of this in media, but they are
in the southern part of Lebanon as well.
Okay, so their borders now extend into Lebanon. They extend into Syria, past the Golan Heights. They're now in southern, and they said we're here to stay. So their borders, and they've been clear about this for a long time, their borders are Greater Israel, which means the entire Middle East. That's Israel's borders. It's the Middle East. I don't know if it includes Iran. Probably not, but they don't want Iran as any kind of force that can interfere with them. I don't think Israel can do anything about that. That'll be left to us. And I don't know if Trump will do it. So that's and the borders are always expanding, It's like I've already said, they've expanded them to include half of Saudi Arabia. And so that leaves one half of an Arab country left. And then they said, okay, it includes Pakistan. Well, that's not even Arab. They're not Arabs. And why does Israel want Pakistan? I don't know. But all of that is supposed to become Israel. You see, originally it was from the Nile to the Euphrates. It was a huge chunk, but now it's the entire Middle East. So that's their borders. That's their declared borders. So we've talked about it before, or I have, that the Arabs, instead of uniting and dealing with their enemy, they fell one by one. And they're basically gone, aren't they? I mean, they're gone. And even Putin has pulled out on them. So Israel's situation today is much stronger than it was during the Cold War, when there was Soviet backing for some of the countries in the Middle East that we in Israel couldn't crack. Well, there's no Russian backing now, and both Russia and the United States are playing up to the former head of a terrorist organization, which has become president of Syria. Now, remember, we didn't want Assad because we called him a dictator. So now we have the former leader of an official terrorist group cited as terrorist by the United States and I think by Russia. I can't remember. Um, so in this sense, Israel continues to expand.
Paul, do you think that Donald Trump, without removing Zelensky from power in Ukraine, could achieve some sort of leverage on Europeans? Because as long as they have Zelensky in power in Ukraine linked to the United Kingdom and the intelligence of the United Kingdom, are they going to be able to, to practice their leverage on Europeans?
Well, first of all, removing Zelensky doesn't affect anything that the Russians are concerned about. Once
What I
again,
mean by removing Zelensky, Paul, is not just about Zelensky, about anybody in Ukraine who's linked with the intelligence in the West, specifically MI6, and those people, being someone from Ukraine, from those people in 2014, before the coup happening in Ukraine. I'm talking about those people being in power in Ukraine again.
oh, you mean bringing back the Russian-friendly crowd?
Yeah, exactly. Which would work, by the way, for Europeans, for the Russians. That could help the situation in the western part of Ukraine.
Well, for that to happen, the United States and Europe and the British would have to agree that Russia has valid security concerns and that these concerns should be dealt with and accommodated. And so bringing back the former government, if they still exist, bringing them back, it could, in a way, perhaps for the Russians, a substitute for a more comprehensive security agreement, or at least they would see it as a good step forward that removes the problems they face of how to achieve Putin's goals when they don't want to use sufficient violence to achieve them. So if they could get the West to agree to that, it would be an improvement for the Russians. But I think the basic problem is the insecurity that the Russians feel from NATO on their borders and from this American foreign policy doctrine of hegemony. And there's no reason for all of these attacks on Russia. They know it, except hostility. And the Russians themselves have done nothing to cause the hostility. The hostility goes back to Clinton when he violated the promise of the United States government and put NATO on Russia's borders. And then we put missile bases in Poland and Romania. And then we overthrew a Russian-friendly government in Ukraine. And then we built an army and so on. Well, the Russians didn't provoke any of that except by not doing anything. Maybe if early on they had acted in a very forceful way, it would have all stopped. And it's just progressed. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. And now Europe has agreed to put 5% of its GDP into weapons. And they're talking about preparing for war with Russia in a few years. And of course, we also used the Georgian government back in 2007, 2008 to invade South Ossetia, which was there were Russian peacekeepers there. and they got killed. And so Putin had to send in the army. So why did we do that? It was aggressive behavior. And Putin's unpreparedness uh, was the opportunity. So it has to be at some point um, the Russians become convinced that the era of aggressive behavior toward Russia is over. And that's what it takes to have a solution. And this is not discussed. It's not discussed in Washington. It's not discussed by the foreign policy people. It's not in the literature. Um, there's just a consensus view that somehow Russia has to be defeated. And the definition of defeat varies, but the whole notion is they're an enemy. And it doesn't seem to be people raising the question, are they really an enemy? Why are they an enemy? What did they do? Are we responsible for this? These kinds of questions aren't part of the discussion. So it makes it impossible for just any other kind of solution to work. The basic problem is the Russians feel insecure. And we keep making them feel more insecure. And so they keep developing nuclear superweapons. And Putin tries to use those weapons as a substitute for his own missing forceful responses. It's like saying, well, sooner or later, but it's not working. Trump wasn't impressed with, they announced 2 super weapons last week, and Trump wasn't impressed. And the reason is that the Russians have created this impression that they're really not resolute. And that's a highly risky situation. That's just because it invites more provocations. That's what has to be broken. That process has got to be broken because eventually it will lead to some major war. And of course, it won't go well for the West. We don't have any such weapons or any way to defend against them. So it's a stupid thing that's happening. And it only serves, well, it serves the neocons' ideology, but materially, it only serves the armaments manufacturers to get more and more money. And the politicians who make these things happen, they get commissions from the sales. So it's a totally corrupt situation. And it feeds on itself because it produces money. And people want the money. It's more important to them than what might happen down the road from this.